The young and the restless spoilers. Diane had always walked a careful line between protective mother and calculating manipulator, but nothing could have prepared Genoa City for the revelation she was about to unleash. For months, whispers swirled about her disapproval of Kyle's entanglement with Audra, a woman whose past was as shadowy as her ambition was blinding. Diane's resistance had seemed rooted in instinct, in motherly suspicion of a woman who appeared too polished, too confident, too conveniently tethered to Kyle's increasingly reckless emotions. But now, that resistance crystallized into a truth far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. Audra didn't know her parents. She had never known. Raised in fragmented foster homes, she had learned early how to rely on herself, how to use her voice, her intellect, her allure, and her silence as shields. Her strength was forged in abandonment, her independence born from the refusal to be pitted. Tucker had taken her under his wing, yes, but his protection was conditional, and now, with him gone from Genoa City, she was more exposed than ever. And yet, even in that exposure, she never imagined that her entire identity was a lie that had been carefully folded, sealed, and hidden by people with far more power than her. When Diane entered the Abbott mansion's grand living room that morning, her face pale and lips tight, Kyle had no idea that his life was about to unravel in the most grotesque and emotionally shattering way imaginable. She didn't come with anger or threats or the controlling demeanor he had grown to resent. She came with papers. With proof. With history rewritten. And when she spoke, her voice was haunted, as if she too couldn't believe what she was saying. Diane revealed that Audra was not just another woman with ambition, she was Jack's biological daughter. She was Kyle's half-sister. The words hung in the air like poison, thickening with every second of silence that followed. Kyle's breath caught in his chest, his vision tunneling as the horror of it registered. He had shared his body, his trust, his affection with his sister. They had loved, they had fought, they had surrendered to each other in ways that now seemed vile. It was no longer about betrayal or secrets or emotional games, it was an abomination, and it shattered the core of everything Kyle believed about his place in the Abbott family, about himself, about love. How Diane had known this and Jack had not became the next question that spiraled through Kyle's crumbling mind. Diane claimed she had received the results of a private DNA test. Results that were not meant to surface. Results tied to a blood sample taken years ago when Audra had sought medical testing during one of her shadowy business internships. Someone had flagged the results, someone had matched them, and somehow, they had landed in Diane's hands. She had not acted until she was sure, she said, because even for her, the idea was too devastating to confront. She claimed she had gone to the lab herself, demanded confirmation, cross-checked blood types, mitochondrial patterns, and familial markers. The result was undeniable. Audra was biologically tied to Jack. A daughter he never knew he had. A daughter that Diane had known existed but never knew was Audra until recently. Diane's guilt, strangely, did not soothe Kyle. Instead, it made him sicker. Because if Diane had known even for a day longer than she had revealed it, she had allowed this incestuous nightmare to unfold. She had watched him fall deeper into the arms of his half-sister. And now she had broken him with a document and a whisper. But Diane wasn't the only name spinning in Kyle's fury. There was Victor. Of course, there was Victor. Victor, who always had his hand in every web, every scandal, every broken bond in Genoa City. Was it really possible that Diane had uncovered something that Victor hadn't already known? Could it be mere coincidence that Victor had recently been so interested in Audra's loyalty, that he had tried, more than once, to steer her away from Kyle with sudden projects, unreachable offers, and subtle threats? Could it be that Victor, the master manipulator, had orchestrated the entire connection to begin with, or worse, had let it happen just to destroy the Abbott family from within? Victor had long held disdain for Jack. The idea that his son had unknowingly bedded his half-sister would be a psychological time bomb that no Abbott could survive unscathed. Kyle couldn't shake the suspicion that Victor had known, had allowed this to happen, and had smiled quietly in the shadows as the Abbotts, once again, bled from within. Audra, for her part, was destroyed. She had never known. She had no reason to suspect. Her life had been defined by uncertainty, but never had she imagined that the man who raised her wasn't her father and that the man she loved was her brother. She didn't fight back when Diane revealed the truth. She didn't scream or accuse. She simply collapsed into herself, retreating into silence that even she couldn't mask with her usual poise. The confident, calculating woman who had taken the business world by storm, who had survived Tucker's tutelage and Victor's mind games, was now broken by a truth she could neither deny nor change. Her romance with Kyle, already fraught with tension, secrecy, and judgment, was now over in the most final and unbearable way. She had loved a man who was blood. She had made love to someone who shared her father. And now, she would forever be that woman who crossed a line she never saw coming. The fallout was nuclear. Jack was shaken to the core. Learning that he had a daughter, after all these years, should have been a bittersweet moment of redemption, a chance to expand the family he had spent his life nurturing. But this wasn't a joyful reunion. It was a scandal. A tragedy. He had failed to protect his son. He had failed Audra by not being present when she was born, by not knowing the truth, by not recognizing something in her that was his. Jack confronted Diane with a storm of accusations, but even through his fury, he knew that some of the blame lay with him. His past, his recklessness, his inability to keep track of the women and the mistakes he had made had come back to haunt him in the worst way. He stared into Audra's eyes and saw echoes of himself, his fire, his ruthlessness, his desperation for belonging. But it was too late for that recognition to heal. It only added to the agony. The Abbott family fractured under the weight of the revelation. Kyle withdrew from everyone, unable to face his father, his mother, or himself. Audra vanished from public view, retreating into a self-imposed exile, unwilling to answer calls, respond to messages, or attend meetings. Jabbo suffered, the business shaken by the emotional implosion of its most visible faces. Rumors spread across Genoa City like wildfire. The press caught wind of the story, twisted it into sensational headlines. Enemies of the Abbotts circled like vultures. Victor, ever calculating, remained silent, but his smirk was impossible to ignore. Whether he had known or not, he benefited. The Abbott name, long a symbol of family unity and resilience, was now tarnished beyond recognition. And yet, beneath all the wreckage, a deeper question lingered like smoke. If Diane knew, who else knew? Were there other secrets buried in the tangled history of Genoa City's most powerful families? Did someone help Diane obtain those results? Was it all a ploy to drive a wedge between Kyle and Jack? And most importantly, if Jack was Audra's father, who was her mother? And why had she hidden the truth? The answers to those questions were still out there, pulsing like live wires beneath the surface of an already volatile reality. The Abbott legacy had taken a devastating blow, not from a corporate takeover or a legal scandal, but from within. From blood, from betrayal, from a love that should never have happened. And as Genoa City reeled from the revelation, one truth became terrifyingly clear: in this town, nothing stayed buried forever, and even the most carefully guarded secrets had a way of exploding when they were least expected. Let me know if you'd like to continue this arc, explore Victor's role more deeply, or follow what happens to Audra next. Diane had carried the secret like a stone in her chest, heavy and sharp, bruising her heart every time she looked at Kyle, every time she watched Audra walk into a room without knowing the blood that ran through her veins. She wasn't proud of her silence, but silence, in her eyes, had felt like mercy, for Jack, for Kyle, for the fragile bonds that held the Abbott family together. She had learned long ago that the truth, while noble, had the power to destroy more than it healed. And this truth, this revelation that Audra was Jack's daughter, was the kind that could reduce everything to ash. But time has a way of squeezing even the most disciplined into submission, and the day had come when Diane could no longer hold the weight alone. The disgust she saw in Kyle's face when he looked at himself, the confusion in Jack's eyes as he struggled to make sense of the dynamic between his son and Audra, and the growing tension simmering under the Abbott roof finally shattered the protective wall she had built around the truth. She had to speak. She had to release the bomb that would fracture their lives. She had to do it now, before the damage became irreversible or unforgivable. When the words finally left Diane's lips, when the DNA results were laid bare, when the horror of the truth rolled across the room like thunder, there was no anger from Jack, not at first. Only disbelief. Then silence. Then something else. Something unexpected. Jack didn't scream. He didn't accuse. He looked at Audra, this woman who had entered his orbit with fire and grit and unapologetic ambition, and suddenly everything changed. He saw in her not a threat to Kyle, not an outsider, but a piece of himself that had been missing all along. The way her eyes flared when challenged, the way she carried herself with equal parts confidence and sorrow, the way she had clawed her way to the top without ever asking for permission, it was all Jack. It was unmistakable now. Audra stood frozen, her entire identity unraveled in a single sentence. For so long she had been alone in the world, convinced she didn't belong to anyone or anything. Her independence had been her armor, her loneliness her constant companion. But now she had a father. And that father was Jack Abbott. Jack stepped forward, slow, reverent, as if approaching a sacred relic. And then, as if decades of absence and guilt had conspired to break him open, he wrapped his arms around Audra and pulled her close. She didn't resist. She didn't breathe. And then the tears came, raw, unstoppable. Not tears of pain, not entirely. But of grief. Of release. Of something too old and too wounded to be named. Kyle stood in the corner, paralyzed by the intimacy unfolding before him, nauseated by the truth, devastated by the implications. His father, his ex-lover, his family, all tangled in a knot that no logic could untie. But even through the sickening realization of what he and Audra had shared, Kyle couldn't deny the heartbreak and the healing happening in front of him. Audra and Jack had found each other. Too late for innocence. Too late for clean starts. But not too late for truth. Not too late for a kind of love neither had ever dared to imagine. The revelation forced Jack to confront the mess of his past, a past littered with broken relationships, fleeting romances, and emotional negligence. Jack had always been a man of passion. But passion without consequence had now led him here, to a moment where his lack of awareness had cost everyone something. He couldn't even remember Audra's mother, not precisely. There had been so many nights, so many faces, so many women who had passed through his life like comets, burning bright and fading just as fast. But Audra's mother hadn't been like the others, not really. She had been quiet, observant, resistant to Jack's charm. She hadn't chased him or clung to him. She had disappeared without a trace, and Jack, too arrogant at the time to question it, had let her go, unaware that she carried a child he would never know. Now that woman's silence had come back to haunt him. According to Diane, Audra's mother had intentionally kept Jack in the dark. She hadn't wanted to disrupt his life, hadn't wanted to saddle him with responsibility he hadn't asked for. She had made the decision to raise her daughter alone, to shield Audra from the complications of the Abbott legacy. But in doing so, she had deprived them both, the Jack of his daughter and Audra of a father. There was tragedy in that choice, even if it had been made from a place of protection. Jack could feel the weight of all the years he hadn't been there, the birthdays missed, the scraped knees, the school plays, the heartbreaks. And Audra could feel the ache of having longed for something her whole life without knowing it was missing. In the aftermath, the Abbott mansion became a quiet battlefield of grief and reorientation. Ashley didn't know how to process it. Billy was stunned into silence. Tracy offered soft words and shaky comfort. But it was Kyle who carried the heaviest burden. He had not only lost a lover, he had lost part of his own narrative. Everything he thought he knew about Audra was now tainted by an unspeakable truth. How was he supposed to live with the memories? How was he supposed to see her as a sister when he had touched her as a lover? The shame crushed him, and though no one blamed him, not Audra, not Jack, not even Diane, he couldn't forgive himself. He distanced himself from everyone, claiming to need space, but really it was exile. He couldn't bear the looks, the pity, the quiet understanding in everyone's eyes. As for Audra, she stayed. At first, only for a day. Then 2. Then a week. Jack wouldn't let her go. He insisted she belong, that she had every right to be in the Abbott home, to claim her place, to build a future out of the wreckage. Slowly, she let herself believe him. She let herself see the possibility that she was no longer alone. That family, though broken, could be rebuilt. That identity, though shattered, could be reforged. Jack took her to the family archives, showed her photos of Dina, of John, of himself as a boy, of Kyle as a baby. He gave her keys to the house, to Jabot. He told her that her voice mattered, that her ideas could shape the future of the company. And for the first time in her life, Audra didn't have to fight for a seat at the table. She already had one. But not everyone was ready to move on. Rumors swirled in Genoa City. Gossip columns hinted at the scandal. Business competitors seized the chaos to sow doubt in Jabot's stability. And all the while, a quiet question burned in the background: who knew the truth first? Diane said she had acted alone, but the more time passed, the less convinced everyone became. Had she really kept this secret all to herself? Or had she told someone with motives of their own? All eyes turned to Victor. He had always viewed the Abbotts as a threat to his empire, and this revelation, this implosion, was too perfect. Had Victor known? Had he orchestrated this by manipulating Diane or uncovering the truth before anyone else? Or worse, had he arranged for Jack to meet Audra's mother in the first place, as part of some ancient scheme that had finally borne fruit? Diane refused to answer. Victor denied everything. Jack didn't know what to believe. But the damage was done, and the Abbott family was changed forever. What came next remained uncertain. Could Kyle rebuild himself after the trauma? Would Audra stay long enough to help lead Jabot into a new era? Could Jack make peace with the sins of his past and the pain they had caused his children? And if Victor had indeed played a role in this nightmare, when would he strike again? Because if this scandal had taught anyone anything, it was that in Genoa City, the past is never really past. It lurks behind every closed door, every whispered name, waiting for its chance to destroy the future. Let me know if you'd like to continue with what happens to Kyle next, or whether Audra's mother will appear. We can also explore whether Victor truly orchestrated this for revenge.